Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of The Real Deal with Dee and Denice. But today, you're getting the real deal from Dee and Dee's mom, Andrea Roberto.
Hi, everyone.
Denise was meant to be back with us today, but between celebrating her grandson's wedding and moving, she forgot today, November 2nd, was her birthday. So a big happy birthday to Denise. Though we love having her on the show, we want her to enjoy her birthday and not have to think about any of this legal or political chaos for once in her life. So she'll be back with us next week. Speaking of next week, Donald Trump is set to take the stand on Monday, November 6th. So today, after briefing some updates from last episode, my mom and I thought we would catch you all up on the latest deal with Trump's legal battles so that you're prepared for next week. Before we get into this episode, we do have an important announcement to make. Mom, what's the deal?
The deal is I want to remind everybody to make sure to go vote on Tuesday, November 7th. Here in Pennsylvania, there's a very important Supreme Court race going on for judge, and it will determine the balance of the court. I just want to make sure nobody's fooled because there are no R or D designations on the Pennsylvania ballot. And Carolyn Carluccio is pro-life in the extreme. She supports banning abortion in all cases, no exceptions. So if you are somebody like me and like Dee that believes in women's rights and that women's right to privacy and that women have the right to make their own decisions about their own body, then I would suggest voting for Daniel McCaffrey, who is endorsed by Planned Parenthood and will make a great justice.
Thank you, Mom. And yeah, just to back up what you said, Carolyn Carluccio bragged about her anti-abortion credentials during the Republican primary, but now she's trying to hide that information from voters after scrubbing it from her website. Carluccio and her wealthy family have a personal history of funding anti-abortion groups like the ones that are supporting her campaign. And Carluccio made secret assurances to anti-abortion extremists about where she stands, but she won't be honest with voters or the press about it now. So be wary. Did you have something to say?
Go vote November 7th, McCaffrey.
Yes, go vote November 7th, McCaffrey, if you're in Pennsylvania for Supreme Court Justice. All right, up first, MAGA Mike Johnson has been the new Speaker of the House for just over a week now. On last episode, we talked about how the first bill he wanted to put to the floor was climate protection rollbacks. But I've heard he decided to go another direction instead. Mom, what's the latest deal with MAGA Mike in the House Republican Conference?
Well, the first bill he's going to put on the floor is a bill to fund Israel. Now, Biden requested one bill that had Israel funding, Ukraine funding, and Taiwan funding, and I think some funding for the border. And MAGA Mike is obviously not down with that. So he brought just Israel funding to the floor. And tied to it, it's $14.5 billion. So he tied to it cutting $14.5 billion from the IRS, which is the extra money that was in the Inflation Reduction Act to give resources to the IRS so that they can audit billionaire tax sheets, because that's a very arduous, long, resource-heavy process. So when the resources are light at the IRS, they don't have the manpower to do that. So they end up only auditing regular people like us, which I'm not saying nobody like us should ever be audited, but all the billionaire tax cheats are just doing whatever they want because there just wasn't the resources to investigate. So that's what he wants to do. Tie the Israeli funding to allowing billionaires to continue cheating on their taxes.
Right, exactly, Mom. And 2 points to that. One, as we'll learn in a minute when we get to the New York civil fraud case, Trump got away with what he was doing for 20 years. So if that doesn't highlight the importance of the IRS having this kind of resources so that they can audit people like Trump, I don't know what does. I will also say, though, Trump is, not a billionaire and does not have the exorbitant amount of money that he wants you to believe.
True.
But again, still highlights that point. Now, my second point to you was I just really want to highlight for listeners again how much $1 billion is and how different that is from $1 million. So to put it in other terms, 1 million seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 32 years. 32 years.
Just think about that. And that's the difference between a million and a billion. And a million is a lot.
Right. And that's, to highlight that point again, that's why when we're talking about cutting taxes on the rich, if you make $1 million, that's a lot of money. You know what? Good for you. I'll probably never see $1 million a day in my life. However, nobody's coming after you or your million or your 2 million or your 3 million. In fact, nobody wants high taxes on you until you pass the threshold of 10 million. There is no pulling yourself up from the bootstraps if you're a billionaire. Even if you created your business from the ground up, great for you. I'm so glad that you did that. However, in Trump's case, small loan of $1 million is not building your own company from the ground up. However, even if you did not become a billionaire on your own. Everybody that works for you is who helped you achieve that height. And that should be spread around.
Absolutely right. And I think here is a good place to just remind everybody, people talk about raising the tax rates on the richest, on the top 10. So say we did that at 10 million, like you were suggesting. That higher tax rate is only applied to the money they make over $10 million.
Exactly right.
Up to $10 million is taxed at the regular rate, like like the statutes already say. It would only raise it on the money they made over $10 million. Because some people think, oh, just because you make $10 million, people want to take 70% of it away. No, we want you to keep your $10 million and then take 70% of what you make over that.
Right. So if you made $10 million and $1, you would have to give 70 cents in that high tax rate. So, okay, back to MAGA Mike and how he basically wants to cut taxes for the rich. Cut taxes for the rich? Yay, says MAGA Mike. Okay. So back to it. So basically what I heard was that he's only down to help Israel if they cut this funding from the IRS that audits ultra-rich people. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct.
Wow.
Fortunately, we have the Democratic Senate, and even the Republican senators want nothing to do with that. I think the biggest reason for that is they don't want to set any kind of precedent because this is considered national security spending, and usually that's not tied to anything. There's no, you have to do this or we're not going to fund national security. So even Senate Republicans are like, that's dead in the water when it gets here. So that's one good thing. And we have a Democratic president, thank God. So even if for some weird reason it got through the Senate, which it never would, he could veto it.
Yeah, and I just want to make the point before we move on that the Republicans only care about the deficit until they're in charge.
Absolutely. And we have decades of proof of that. They spent like crazy during the Bush administration, and they spent like absolute crazy when Trump was president. They added $8 trillion with a T, $8 trillion to the deficit during his term, which is more than any president added in their term. And he was only president for one term. Most of them were presidents for 2 terms.
That is absolutely obscene. And
that's not just the most, that's the most relatively. Because of course it's going to be the most because everything is more money now. But even if you adjust money-wise, it's still the most.
Right. So even if you adjust for, inflation and how money has changed in the present day from the past, still by ratio, he has spent way more than any other president in his one term, including 2-term presidents.
Right.
And you said, I'm sorry, did you say 8 trillion with a T
Yes,
that he added to the
trillion with
deficit?
a T. Yeah, how
Okay.
many years is that?
Yeah, there we go. Just to provide a bit of context to our listeners there. 1 billion seconds is 32 years, and that was a lot, right? That was a big difference between 12 days at a million seconds and
Right.
32 years at a billion seconds. But 1 trillion seconds with a T, 1 trillion seconds is about 31,700 years.
Holy moly.
Which, in Mike Johnson's views, that would be about 5 Earth lifespans.
I was just going to say that. I was
Since,
just going to say
he
that.
only believes the world is 6,000 years old. Exactly. All right, Mom. Moving on. I've been doing my best to keep up with everything going on with the Trump trials, but it is a lot. Although I know you have been quite laser focused on what's been going on. So let's start with the New York civil fraud case, because I know some of the Trump family members have testified this week leading up to Trump's testimony on Monday, November 6th. And then we can dive into his many other criminal and civil trials after.
Okay. Just to correct you, the Trump family members testified this week. They didn't really testify yet. Don Jr. was on the stand yesterday for about an hour. They're going to finish him today and then move on to Eric. And then Monday will be Donald Trump and Wednesday will be Ivanka. So that's what we have to look forward to next week. So we'll probably talk more about that case next week. But just to give you a general overview of what this case is about, it's a $250 million civil fraud case brought by Letitia James, and it alleges that what he was basically doing was inflating his assets to make everything look more valuable when he wanted to go get a loan or something like that. But then he would decrease the value of his assets when it came to paying taxes and that kind of thing. So obviously that's illegal for a zillion reasons. And while it may be true that a lot of New York businessmen may flirt with the margins on that, like your tax assessment may be lower than what you value the property at. It's just the amount. For example, Alan Weissenberg testified 2 weeks ago, I think, and they were asking about one of the financial statements. And what it said in there was that his penthouse or whatever in Trump Tower was 30-something thousand square feet. But the actual penthouse is only 10,000 square feet. And the way you value property in Manhattan like that is by square footage. So he at least tripled the value of a piece of property that his penthouse, the most valuable in New York. And that's ridiculous. So in that particular testimony, they cornered out Alan Weissenberg to admit. At first, he was trying to say, I don't remember how much the square footage was. I don't know if I ever knew it was 10,000. So they showed him a document that he signed where it was 10,000, like years and years and years before that. So unless that penthouse somehow grew 3 times its size over time, that was obvious fraud. And part of the 63-12 powers is in that law, if there is persistent fraud like that, like you can show over time, look, he said the penthouse was this big this day, this big this day. He said this property was worth this much this time, but he said it was only worth this much this time. There's so much of that. That's persistent fraud, and there does not have to be intent. If the fraud is there, period. So
Exactly.
Letitia James, when the case started, moved for summary judgment because she said, oh, we already have enough evidence. There's nothing to dispute. There's nothing to have a trial for. And because Chris Kice is unfamiliar with the law there, and Alina Habba, they never checked the box for a jury trial. If you do not check the box and request a jury trial, then these civil trials are bench trials. In other words, the trier of fact is the judge. So since the judge sees the evidence and the judge is the one deciding this, there's no jury to put it in front of. So
right.
He granted some summary judgment only on the first count, which was the persistent fraud. That's also the biggest one. So he's already guilty of that.
Right. And just to pause you there on persistent fraud. Okay, so far what we've said is that this Trump trial, the New York civil fraud case, is centering on allegations that Trump and his organization inflated the value of his assets in order to obtain favorable loans, but deflated his assets in order to evade taxes. And
Correct.
there's claims of fraudulent financial statements. To my understanding, his defense here is what we can call the so what defense. But the expert testimony that was going on for so long yesterday, which kind of delayed Don Jr.'s testimony, was spent explaining how if Trump would have been honest, there was no way that a quote unquote reasonable lender would have loaned him that amount of money, and therefore the interest at those interest rates, and therefore because of that, those lenders would have actually made a lot of money there. And so they're out about tens of millions of dollars, at least 150 million.
His so what is, he's saying there is no crime. He's saying that he didn't inflate the value of his assets. And that, like, I'll give you an example, Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago was valued over those years. It varied between 18 million and like $26 million. And surrounding properties are worth way more than that. So he's trying to make the case that Mar-a-Lago is worth $1 billion or whatever. And I'm like, wow, right on TV, you're just doing the same thing you've been doing illegally all this time, inflating the value of your assets. But the thing about Mar-a-Lago and why it's not worth as much as it is because he chose to keep it a commercial property, not a residential property, because the taxes would be less. He also allowed several encumbrances to be put on there. There's a ton of things you can't build on that property ever. You can't ever build homes and stuff, or separate condos or things like that. So that's what makes the property so much less valuable than surrounding properties. So this is kind of what he's been doing for his whole career.
He agreed to. But what I was saying about the so what defense is that what he is saying also is that so what that I did this, I paid the loans back, no harm, no foul.
Right, there was no victim.
He's saying that, and that's why I was letting you guys know that actually yesterday, when the expert was speaking for so long, he was disproving that outright.
Right, because they could have made more money than they did. Because Trump's point is, I paid the loans back. Nobody lost any money. So the casino example more deals with disgorgement, which is another part of that 63-12 statute. And what it means is that not only can you take back money that like maybe somebody might have lost and you have to make restitution, but you have to give back money that you received through ill-gotten gains, is what they call it. So, for example, if you work somewhere and stole $100 out of the safe, out of the petty cash box or whatever, and you went to the casino and you won $1,000. So the next day in the morning, you come back and you put the $100 back in the petty cash box. So no harm, no foul, right? Wrong. You still committed a crime. That was still theft. And it's still illegal. But in New York, on top of that, you have to give back the money you received from the ill-gotten gains. So not only would he have had to return the $100, but he has to pay the state the other $900 that he won at the casino. And then the state can decide what to do with that money and who should get it or if it should go into the state coffers. So.
Yeah, and I will just say again, running for president was the dumbest thing this man ever did with so many skeletons in his closet.
100%. 100%.
As we mentioned, he got away with this for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And, part of that could be because the IRS needs to get more support so that they can, spend the time that they need to on auditing these kinds of people. Mm-hmm. And the other part of that is, he just has lawyers, has people, has just been getting away with all this. And then he wanted to go run for president and put himself under this amount of scrutiny. Of course, people are going to find what's in your closet, sir.
Right. That's not a political thing. He is not being scrutinized because he's a political opponent or something like that. He was being scrutinized because he ran for president. Everybody is.
Right.
It's just that there was so much stuff under the microscope looking at him. That's why he has to deal with all this.
Right.
And
most exactly. And he raised all those red flags himself when he wanted to be the only person running for president to not release his tax returns. Mm-hmm. What were you hiding in there? Obviously, a lot.
Yeah. He wanted to just submit his personal financial statement, the one that had been fraudulent for the last 20 years. Statement of financial condition. That's what that's called.
Wow. All right. So did Don Jr. say anything important when he was on the stand yesterday? I know he's finishing his testimony today.
Yeah. Well, one thing that did come out that was interesting is, well, first they asked him if he had anything to do with the financial statements, and he kept saying, no, I didn't do that. That wasn't part of my job. And then they put documents in front of him that he signed that said all the information in there was accurate and blah, blah, blah. So that kind of nailed him right there. And he's a defendant too, mind you. It's not just Trump on trial here. But they also produced a document which showed Trump became president. They had to put the company in an irrevocable trust so that he supposedly had nothing to do with the business dealings. Normally, what happens is you put a complete stranger, objective person in charge of the trust and just holds down the fort till you're not president anymore.
Right, because if you put your son in charge of it, okay, sure, I'm not the one on the paperwork here, but what's to stop me from telling my son what to do?
Right, or my son telling me what's going on. So, exactly.
Right, and for my son to not have my interests in heart.
Right. And what came out was on January, I think it was the 12th or the 15th of 2021, while he was, right after January 6th, while he was spouting all the election crap, and still is, by the way, he put himself back in charge of the trust. So
Don Jr. put himself back in the trust.
No, Donald Trump.
Oh.
Put himself, which means he knew he wasn't president. Because as president, he couldn't have done that.
Wow.
So don't tell me you think you won. Because if you thought you won, why are you doing that?
Right, and that could have an interesting implication on the other cases that we'll get to in a minute. But speaking of interesting implications, tell us about pleading the fifth.
When Trump testifies next week. Yes, a lot of people were saying, could he plead the fifth? Sure he could. It's a tricky situation for him because anything he says in this trial can be used against him in the other trials. But in a civil case, which this is, you can plead the fifth. And in a criminal case, the jury is not allowed to consider that. They're not allowed to put any emphasis on that, and they're not allowed to assume that you're guilty of whatever it is because you pled the fifth. But in a civil trial, it's the opposite. In a civil trial, you can plead the fifth, but if you do, the trier of fact, which is either the jury or in this case the judge, can assume the negative inference. So they can assume that you are guilty of whatever it is you're pleading the fifth to.
And how does that connect with his other cases he's got going on? Why would this be a tricky situation for him?
Because you don't know what they're going to ask. What if he says something that could be used against him in, the election interference case? Or, he's very volatile, Trump.
Right, because
he could say, who knows what he could say.
Right, because pleading the fifth in a civil case means that you can infer the worst. However, in a criminal case, we know that's not the case. But if he does not plead the fifth and says some things that are usable in other cases, prosecutors are okay to use that information, correct?
Absolutely they are. That's the danger for him. So
there's nothing stopping whatever he says in this case being used. There's no legal boundaries or no double jeopardy, whatever we got going on. Nothing there, right?
Nope. Anything he says in a court of law can be used against him in another court of law. The other thing I want to add is what's very interesting is that the Letitia James, in her case, is calling Trump to the stand on her side of the case. Normally, this happens later in the case when the defense is putting on their case. They call their guy tells them whatever, and then she can cross-examine him. And cross-examination, during cross, you can lead the witness. You did X and Y, didn't you, Mr. Trump? Yes or no? And they can say yes or no. But when you're on direct examination, you can only ask open-ended questions. What happened on this day, Mr. Trump? And you can't lead them into saying, into the answer that you're trying to get them to say. But on cross, you can do that. However, if you declare the person a hostile witness, which in this case, obviously Trump is going to be hostile to the prosecution's ends, she can cross-examine him on direct examination. So that's going to be really great. I mean, we keep saying Letitia James. It's actually her team that's trying this, but it was definitely her decision to do that and to call them in her case rather than in their case.
But declaring the witness a hostile witness must have the judge's approval, right? Letitia James and her team couldn't just say this of their own volition.
Right. The judge would say, yeah, I agree. It's a hostile witness. But I think it's pretty much understood when you call a defendant. Okay, so that's basically where we are in the fraud case. And like you said, we'll talk about that more next week after the Trumps all testify.
All right. That was a lot, so I'm looking forward to unpacking the rest of it next week. Let's move into Trump's other trials. If you would give us an overview, Mom, aside from his $250 million New York civil fraud case, we're also looking at 4 criminal indictments, 2 federal, 2 state. We're looking at E. Jean Carroll case. We're looking at a 14th Amendment case in Colorado. I don't know, maybe some others. What do you got for us, Mom? What's the deal?
Okay, here's the deal. The 4 criminal indictments. I guess we'll go federal first. So Jack Smith is the special counsel, and he has 2 cases. One is an election interference or election subversion case. I believe the actual charge is obstruction of Congress. And that's in front of Judge Chutkan, scheduled to go to trial in March. And the other federal case is in Florida, and that's regarding the Mar-a-Lago documents case. Now, Judge Chutkan in the D.C. case has been fantastic. And she's moving this right along. She's making it quite clear that there's not going to be any kind of delays. And she understands the importance for us as a country to have this litigated before there's an election. She put a gag order on Trump because he was threatening witnesses and crap talking Jack Smith and the process and DC. So she put a gag order on him to stop him from doing that. He appealed it, and so she stayed her gag order until the appeal was over. However, as soon as the gag order was stayed, he immediately went back to everything he was doing, and he was threatening Mark Meadows and Bill Barr, and these are witnesses in the case. You cannot intimidate witnesses in a case.
Right.
So
it is well understood that witness intimidation is not okay.
Right. Jack Smith filed a motion with Judge Chutkan and said, hey, you better remove that stay because look, he's going crazy, and, gave all the examples. So she set a motion date. They're going to argue to her whether or not, his free speech rights outweigh her ability to gag him. It's important because it's going to put that process on the record. So then when it goes to the appeals court is only going to look at that record and then decide whether or not it was decided correctly. Whereas if he would have just appealed the gag order without a record, then they would have been able to argue the merits of the case, basically, to the appellate court.
And because she is well within her rights to do this, because he has, in fact, and Jack Smith presented so much evidence of the fact that he has intimidated these witnesses and continued to do this, and did so immediately after the gag was lifted, you would see no issues with an appellate court looking at her decision to do that and saying, yes, she did the correct thing here.
Correct. Having that record go to the appellate court, too, changes the standard under which the appellate court will rule. So when they get the case, it's basically judicial discretion. So Trump is going to have to argue abuse of judicial discretion. Judicial discretion is very broad, and judges everywhere at every level want it to be. It's very important that it stays that way. So it's very difficult to prove abuse of discretion by a judge. So that will be the standard that the appellate court will be looking at, as opposed to just should she have put the gag order on or not. So that's a much higher standard that they're going to have to meet at the appellate court. So that was very smart. She outsmarted him once again.
So what's going on with the next one?
Okay. So when we mentioned the Jack Smith Mar-a-Lago documents case, that's a whole nother animal altogether. That judge, Aileen Cannon, she's extremely inexperienced, has never really tried any cases like this, or in many cases at all, really. And she's a Heritage Foundation hand-picked, Trump-appointed Trumper. Okay. So, yeah, they picked the judges by random, and Jack Smith figured, since he was also charging Walt Nauta, that he better bring the case in Florida, because Walt Nauta's activity only happened in Florida. Trump, it could have been either DC or Florida. He knew it would be harder in Florida, but unfortunately got the worst judge he could have gotten when it came around through the random thing. So she originally scheduled that trial to start in May of 2024, even though the Trump did request like 2 years later. 2025, I think. Maybe even 2026. I don't know. Whatever it was ridiculous. But she said May. But everything that's happened since then, she seems to be dilly-dallying and delaying, and like no one thinks it's going to actually go to trial in May. But she's kind of in a pickle here now, because if she officially delays everything and moves it from May, Fani Willis in Georgia is going to jump on that, take that May date, which would not be good for Trump at all. So if she's truly looking out for Trump, she's kind of in a pickle here.
Right, and just
hoist herself on her own petard, really.
Yeah, and just to, drive that point home, Judge Cannon heard Trump's challenge to the government's classified documents investigation, appointed a special master to review the documents, and then temporarily barred the Justice Department from using those records in its investigation. And that much maligned decision was later reversed by a 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals in the 11th Circuit, which consisted of 3 conservative judges, and 2 of them were Trump appointees, and the other was a George W. Bush appointee.
Yeah, that was a crazy, crazy decision. Everyone was just shocked when it came down. So they knew it was going to get overturned, but that was absolutely scathing against her. So some people thought maybe she would not want to be humiliated like that ever again, so that she might act a little more like she should.
Impartial,
in this case,
like a judge should be.
Which is, I think, why she came up with the May date.
I see.
But now she's just been dilly-dallying around, and they filed another motion to delay. She's leaning towards granting it. So that's just going to be, it's probably going to be the easiest case to win. It's the easiest, hands down.
When it eventually makes it, yeah.
Right. But if anything's going to get delayed till after the election, it'll definitely be that.
If I could just make one more point on Aileen Cannon before we move on to the RICO case. I just want to say, again, remember, these 3 judges that overturned it were all conservative, and they wrote that her decision violated, quote, they used the word clear law, and that her approach, direct quote, would be a radical reordering of our case law, limiting the federal court's involvement in criminal investigations, and violates bedrock separation of powers limitations. That is a direct quote from 3 conservative justices, 2 of whom are Trump appointees.
When I said scathing, I meant scathing.
You sure did. All right, hit us with the RICO case.
Okay, so the RICO case started with 19 defendants. It's that big case in Georgia. She brought it as a racketeering, influenced, and corrupt organization, saying that they all, the whole plot from soup to nuts, beginning to end, and everyone involved is all guilty of the same thing. RICO was originally written as a federal statute for particularly mob cases because, like Trump, that's why he acts like a mobster. Mob bosses would not directly say the thing, but you get it. You know what I mean?
It's
like, wow, it's a
understood.
nice business you got here. Sure, be terrible if something happened to it.
Right.
You know,
Sure, you didn't say, I'm going to come here and burn your business down.
if you
but...
don't pay me my protection money, but that's what he
Right.
said. Right. Okay.
Right.
So now they can have lower people prove that people below them did things. Even if he didn't directly request it of them, he might have had an underling say this to that person, to say this to that person, to get that person to do X. So all of those people now are guilty, and they're all guilty of the same thing.
Right. Because if you were going to burn somebody's, shop down for not paying you protection, you wouldn't burn it down. You'd have your henchmen go do it. And okay, so while we're on this whole mob thing, can we return briefly over to the New York civil fraud case and talk about the Michael Cohen thing? Because I think that this is a perfect crossover.
Oh, yeah, that is actually good job there. Okay. Michael Cohen testified last week in the New York civil fraud case. And when he was under cross-examination, he admitted that Trump specifically didn't say the specific words, hey, go commit fraud and make all my properties look like they cost this much. He would say something like, for me to be on the Forbes 500, or for me to get this loan, or for me to get this, I need this number. He'd write that down on a piece of paper. So our financial statements should say this number. So they knew we have to go back and fudge the paperwork to make the paperwork match the number you gave me, even though you didn't specifically tell me that. That's like the nice business you got there. Like we said
Exactly.
before, hate to see something happen to it. Like, he could say things without saying things. So as soon as Michael Cohen said that on the stand, the attorney for Trump threw this big show. Like, oh my God, this case should be dismissed right now. He's the key witness in the case. He just admitted he lied. Made this big flourish, right? First of all, who are you performing for? There is no jury in this case. The judge already knows the deal. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? And so they make this big flourish, and Trump gets up and storms out of court. Like, he was just appalled that the judge could do that. First of all, the judge can't dismiss a case you've already been found guilty in. This is just, the rest of this trial is just to determine intent on the other charges and decide how big the penalty will be, which will be at least $250 million.
Right.
So,
because as our listeners will remember, that persistent fraud does not require intent. If you have done this persistently multiple times, it does not require intent to be proven in court like the other charges do. That's why it's guilty already.
Because if it's persistent and not intentional, you are terrible at your job. You are terrible at running a business and should be penalized for that. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, if you have persistent fraud over and over and over and over again for years, I mean, that screams intention to me.
Right.
And when they got in front of the judge, she moved, like I said before, for summary judgment. So they're already guilty of the persistent fraud. So now it's just a matter of how much and what the penalties will be for that. And then to determine intention on the other counts, and if found, then what the penalties will be for that. So this is just really a matter of how bad it will be, not are you innocent or guilty. Because it's already been found guilty.
Right. And like we said, we will have more updates on that once the rest of the Trump family members testify and when Don Jr. finishes testifying today. But before we jump back into this RICO case, what's this deal with the whistling past the graveyard? Because I don't think we hit that, and that cracked me up.
So Trump's team brought a motion to dismiss, again, on First Amendment grounds or something. I don't even remember what the grounds were. But it was something that they brought in front of him before, that he denied before. So he was like, look, I see what you're doing here. you're whistling past the graveyard, which means, like, whistling past the graveyard means you're walking past a graveyard, you're terrified, but you want to pretend like you're not, so you whistle. So, in other words, he's saying, look, I know all this terrible shit is happening, and all this mounds of evidence are against you, but you can't keep bringing me these same tired. He told them they were making arguments ad nauseum, is what he said as a quote, because he's tired of ruling on the same thing over and over again. But whistling past the graveyard, that was just mwah, chef's kiss. Okay, so back to the RICO case. It started with 19 defendants. Now, Georgia has a particular speedy trial law that is extra speedy. So Sidney Powell and Ken Chesebro, two lawyers for Trump that are also indicted with him, moved for a speedy trial. So that trial was set to start at the end of October. Leading up to the trial, there was one lower level defendant who pled guilty, but that defendant could give particular evidence against both Powell and Chesebro. So that made them rethink their position. And just before the trial was about to get moving, they both flipped. So the first guy pled to one misdemeanor, and he gets probation or something like that. Then Sidney Powell pled. She pled to several misdemeanors and a fine and something else, but no jail time. And then when Chesebro flipped, he got no jail time also, but he had to plead guilty to a felony, which could affect his legal license.
So what you're highlighting here for us is that as time goes on and as people flip, they are getting, like, the terms of their deals are, getting worse for them each time.
Yes. She's waving a big flag there. Now's the time. If you guys want to come, anybody want to flip, now's the time, because the deals aren't going to get any better.
Right.
So then Jenna Ellis flipped, another lawyer. She's going to be absolutely critical when it comes to Giuliani, because they were like joined at the hip. She went everywhere with him on all of those ridiculous press conferences. And when they went in front of the court, and where was that? Michigan, some kind of made up committee that wasn't even official. They gave all this ridiculous testimony. But that is the trial where Jenna Ellis will forever be famous for being farted on by Rudy Giuliani during that ridiculous commission thing or whatever, that committee thing they did in Michigan. It was absolutely hilarious. And her face looking at him after you totally hear the fart on the mic was classic. And then she got COVID, and Rudy had COVID. So the line is, she got COVID from Rudy's fart. So I don't know if that's true, but the fart absolutely happened.
Do not make this up.
I know. That's just hilarious. So,
oh my gosh. Okay, yeah. So, okay, reeling us back in. Okay, so the terms of the deals are getting worse each time. We got Powell, Chesebro, and Ellis. It raises questions specifically for Rudy Giuliani, probably for John Eastman too. And it's interesting because these are lawyers. Go ahead.
Right, and these are, since it's a RICO case, really you're just connecting people to each other. Like person A tells person B, who helps person C, who does D, and then gets E. Now, E never has to know anything about A, never has spoken to A, never had anything to do with A, doesn't even know what A is thinking. But if E did all that, you know what I mean? They're still part of the conspiracy because it went all the way down. So
right.
all of them
are following this chain of command. Okay.
I'll give you an example specific to this case. Okay, so a big part of this case is two election workers, Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss. Rudy Giuliani blamed them for everything, said that they hid ballots under their desks and exchanged passing things back and forth to each other. And it was a thumb drive that put extra votes in for Biden and all this absolute unproved bullshit. Okay. And so after all that happened, they absolutely destroyed her and her daughter publicly. They had to move. They were terrified. People were saying stuff to them, and they couldn't go to the grocery store, nothing. So that's why they're suing. But they're also a big part of this case
too, didn't they? They testified to
Yes,
Congress.
they did.
I was about moved to tears in their testimonies.
Yes, it was absolutely heart-wrenching. But so anyway, but that's criminal also. So that's part of this case. And as you go trickle all the way down, like they wanted to put a pressure campaign on Ruby Freeman and force her to admit things she didn't do, or all this bad stuff would happen to her. Okay, so originally they sent a white pastor, who is indicted in this case, by the way, to her house to try to get her, God wants you to testify, God, but she didn't even want to talk to him. So because they are who they are, they were like, oh, maybe she'll talk to a black person because she's black. So they got, first black dude, who I can't remember his name, calls Trevion Cootie and gets her to start intimidating Ruby Freeman, and tells Ruby Freeman, we need to meet you at the police station to talk about this. Brings her down to the police station. I don't know how this exactly happens and how they were just allowed to use a police room, but there was video in that room. And she's telling her, if you don't plead guilty to this, some really bad things are going to happen to you and your family. I don't want that to happen to you. I'm here for you, that kind of thing. And that's all on absolute video. So why I bring that up is Trump is guilty of what Trevion Cootie did because of the RICO statute.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's a girl. Trevion Cootie. She.
Okay, she. Okay, so right. So the example you're giving us here is that, Trump is connected to Trevion Cootie, who is connected to the things that they did, horrible things that they did to Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss. And that is an example of this connection we're talking about that you're looking for in a RICO case.
Right. Like Trump didn't have to be the one to say, hey, get the guy to go intimidate her. All he had to say was, we want to, we're going to say this election was stolen. We're going to do everything we can to make that happen. So then the people under them take that note and say, okay, well, I have to do this then. And it just trickles all the way down. So the people at the bottom may never talk to or even know the person at the top or even know what their motivations were. None of that matters. All that matters is that they committed that predicate act, and then that put them in the conspiracy.
Might be the only
same way. Like the top charges that are against Trump, they're guilty of them too. So that's what makes flipping or pleading so attractive. Because if you're just the guy at the bottom who did some dumb shit, and okay, it was wrong and I shouldn't have done it, but I'm not guilty of that. You know what I mean? Right. So it's going to make you much more amenable to flipping, and that's why you see all those cases where they start at the bottom and go up and keep flipping till they get to the big fish.
Right, because you're really worried about that because nobody's hands would be dirty if the guy at the top, i.e. Donald Trump, wasn't sticking his fingers all up in everything to begin with to get those people's hands dirty.
Right. And what part?
The whole Ruby Freeman thing. Because that was like 5+ minutes. All right, Mom. So that's 3 criminal cases so far. 2 of them were federal. 1 of them was state, and that was the RICO. What's the 4th?
Okay. The 4th is the Alvin Bragg Manhattan DA's case against Trump for falsifying business records. There's 34 counts of it. It's in relation to the whole Stormy Daniels thing. Now, what makes this case a little bit tricky is that, well, it's not tricky in that Trump is definitely guilty of falsifying business records. There's 34 counts of them. He's nailed to the wall for that. I don't even know how you could possibly defend it as a misdemeanor. But in order for him to charge them as felonies, which is what he's trying to do here, leading up to the election. So the falsifying of the business records, that felony has to be committed with the intent to commit another crime, which in this case, he's saying, which is violating campaign or election law. because that was helping him with the election. That should have been an in-kind contribution, and it wasn't recorded, and so that's a whole nother thing. So he's saying they falsified the business records to be able to do that. And while that's also true and looks like could be fairly easy to prove, the problem is that the election law or campaign finance law that he'd be violating is federal, and this is a state case. So critics are saying that could be tricky, but Bragg did not charge that. Like, Bragg did not charge the election or campaign finance. He just said that the reason why he did that was to do that, but he didn't charge him with that being the federal crime. These falsifying business records is already a crime as a misdemeanor, but if you do that to cover up another crime, then it's a felony. So he's just saying the other crime he was covering up was the federal election law or campaign finance law infractions. I'm not charging those because I can't, because I'm not in federal court, but I'm saying these are felonies because that's why he did it. And that kind of argument hasn't ever been used before. Because, I'm sure it didn't really come up, but so that's why that case is a little trickier, because there's no precedent there. He's kind of wading into untested waters. I think he's got a pretty good case there, though. And he's guilty of all 34 misdemeanors regardless. But to have them be felonies, that's where the tricky part comes in. So,
okay. So we've covered the 4 criminal cases now, 2 state, 2 federal. Now there is another civil case going on, and that's the E. Jean Carroll defamation and sexual assault case. So as you know, and as our listeners may recall, in May 2023, a jury concluded that Trump had sexually assaulted and defamed E. Jean Carroll, and she was awarded $5 million. However, the only reason that they went with sexual assault instead of outright rape is because a specific statute, the way it's written in New York law, says that digital rape isn't counted as rape under New York law. So it fell under sexual assault. However, that case is still ongoing because he went and defamed her again, even after losing that case. So, Mom, what's the deal there?
Okay, the deal there is, actually, there were 2 cases that E. Jean Carroll originally filed, and one was while Trump was president. So that got appealed and then had to go through that whole process. But in the meantime, as soon as he wasn't president anymore, he did it again. So she filed a case against that, and that's the case that had already been resolved. The other case finally wound its way through, got to the highest court in New York, and they ruled that the case could go forward. So instead of just starting a whole nother case from scratch, because he defamed her again. And when I say he defamed her again, he lost that defamation case. And the next day, the very next day on CNN, defamed her in exactly the same gross way. So rather than filing a whole new case because of that, she attached that to that original case that was already ready to go to trial. So it would get there sooner. And sooner it did, because here we are, it's going to go to court and it's going to go to trial in January. And the judge in that case already ruled that this case is not about whether or not he defamed her or whether or not he sexually assaulted her, because a jury already determined that to be true. So this trial starts with the understanding that he did all of that, and the only thing in front of the jury is how much. And because it's now, he keeps doing it over and over and over again. So the jury is going to be more likely to give a bigger, punishment.
How persistent of him. I just want to close this piece out by reminding listeners that he said that there was no way he could have or would have sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll because he's so gross, because she's so ugly and whatever, and he would never be attracted to someone like her. And then in his deposition, they showed him a picture and they said, "Do you know who this is?" And he said, "Yeah, that's my ex-wife, Martha Maples." And the picture was E. Jean Carroll.
Right. He looked at the picture and said, "Yeah, that's Marla Maples." And the attorney was like, "Wait a minute, what? Who is that?" He made him say it again. He said, no, actually, that's E. Jean Carroll. And he looked at it again. He said, oh, yeah, I guess it is her. It's kind of blurry. I couldn't tell. Not at all blurry, by the way. They showed the picture. Not
And
blurry
so
at all.
to make the case that you would never touch her because she's just not attractive enough for you, which, by the way, he's gross, is just clearly false because you married someone that you couldn't even tell apart from this woman.
Yeah, that's hilarious. That's what I mean.
So,
With Trump in the deposition or Trump on the stand, you never know what is going to come out of his mouth. That was like a gift from the gods. That is not why they showed him that picture. You know what I mean?
right. Okay, 14th Amendment in Colorado. What's the deal?
Okay, in Colorado, this is happening in quite a few states, but it just came to fruition first in Colorado. Some voters in Colorado moved to force the Secretary of State to remove Donald Trump from the ballot. Now, this comes after Lawrence Tribe, who is a liberal, probably the preeminent liberal constitutional scholar, and Michael Ludwig, who is a conservative, extreme conservative.
Right.
He's a Scalia type originalist and was on a lot of short lists for the Supreme Court. But they both determined that the 14th Amendment is, that part of the 14th Amendment is self-actualizing. If it happens, you could take them off the ballot. It doesn't have to be adjudicated in court or anything like that first. So voters decided, hey, like this group of voters in Colorado decided, we're going to try to get him off the ballot here. So they filed. And now that, I think we're moving into day 4 of that case now. So we'll see how that goes. But whatever happens in that case, it's going to be appealed because this is a whole new thing. So it'll be appealed all the way up probably to the Supreme Court. So it'll just be a matter of whether or not they take the case.
Right. And just to tell our listeners, their argument in the case rests on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which bars former civilian or military officials from holding office if they, quote, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States government. And that provision has mostly laid dormant since the Reconstruction era, but Trump's federal and state indictments in the January 6th insurrection is what's really bringing this to the forefront and leading these efforts to bump him off the ballot in these key states. But as you mentioned, this is going on in other places too. And what happens though is that it's the voters, like it's people, it's constituents of these states that are suing their secretaries of state to remove him from the ballot. So even though secretaries of state, if this goes to court, maybe the defendants, they are not the ones who decided this, brought this case, and Trump is attacking them anyway.
That's exactly right. I'll be interested to see how they turn out, but I don't think that's going to be fully resolved before the election, honestly. But because of the upcoming election, they might expedite it all. So it could be. It should be. So we'll see.
All right. Well, that kind of does it for the Trump trials. Obviously, we could have an episode or more per case, but that's kind of scratched the surface today. That catches you up enough. I think our listeners are prepared for what's going to come on Monday and next week after we get the rest of Trump's testimonies. Just to recap, we've covered the 14th Amendment cases. We've covered the E. Jean Carroll defamation and sexual assault cases. We've covered the 4 criminal cases, the 2 state ones, and the 2 federal ones. All right, so now we're going to move on to a new segment that we call Pop Politics, which bridges the crossover between politics and pop culture. And this week, we're going to talk about The Boys, which, if you've not seen The Boys, it's an amazingly done television series on Amazon Prime, but I will give you guys the pre-warning that it is extremely raunchy and extremely violent, lots of blood and gore. But seriously, I cannot overstate how absolutely incredible it is, from the acting to the writing to the film directing to the sounds and the music. Everything about it is just incredible. So The Boys is not just about superhumans and superpowers. It delves into media, race, gender, class privilege, vulnerability, morality, and just absolutely everything in between. And the show just really effectively encapsulates the issues that are facing our time today. It's action-packed, but it's a series with a purpose, and it really masterfully uses the world that it's created to dissect critical social issues that we, come across in our everyday lives. It's really thought-provoking, and its ability, to tackle these social issues just offer, such a platform for conversation and a way to look at it that is easier to understand in a way, because you're watching a show instead of talking about the issues in real time. Mom, what do you have to say?
I absolutely love The Boys. I think season 1, it's a lot more of how corporations control things, how they control the
Yes.
media, and how they control the image of their superheroes. I love how this absolutely right from the jump turns the whole superhero thing on its head. And most of the superheroes are the bad guys.
Yeah.
But you just don't know it because their
Yeah.
image and everything that Vought
Right.
International is the name of the company. And
Exactly.
they absolutely manage
Every aspect of public
yes.
perception.
Yes. And it's completely different. They're completely different people behind the scenes. And it's just amazing.
Yeah. There's this isn't giving anything away. We'll try our best to avoid any spoilers here in case anybody hasn't seen it. But I was rewatching some of The Boys. I think this was in season 2, but one of the main superheroes goes to talk to a kid at a hospital for, public perception of showing oh, look at me. I'm going out here to help kids, even though I don't really care and I don't know a lot about them. And so the superhero says to the kid, you know what? When you get better, I'll tell you what, I'll teach you how to run as fast as me. And the kid goes, yeah, really? You'll teach me to outrun cancer? And that is so sad. But it's just I just think that, that little tiny scene gets at the fact that okay, well, how about you use this position of extreme power that you have to, I don't know, get us healthcare that works, or, any of the, or at least know that I have cancer before you come in this room to do your photo op with me.
Right. Like they're showing that it's all performative. Oh, we have to go sit by the sick kid, take the pictures. You know what I mean? But they don't give a shit about the sick kid or anything.
Right. They're there. Exactly. Exactly. There's another scene where, kind of the big bad guy, he's with his son, and it reminded me about how Donald Trump has been throwing his kids under the bus. Before I tell my scene, can you tell us a little bit about that, Mom?
Well, in the New York civil fraud case, they all had to be deposed first. So they gave depositions, and in Trump's deposition, they kept asking him if he was in charge, who was in charge of doing this financial statement, and he said, "Oh, that was Eric. Oh, that was Eric. I believe Eric was in charge of that." So poor Eric got thrown under the bus 6 times.
Because it's all about him at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, the big bad guy, his name's Homelander, in the show, there's a scene where he's got a kid, and he's trying to teach him how to use his powers, and his kid's like, "Dad, please don't make me jump." And Homelander responds with, "Aw, buddy, you called me dad," and then pushes him off the roof immediately after.
Yeah.
And it's all about him. "Oh, you called me dad. That's so cool," but doesn't care at all about what his kid was just saying to him.
Yeah, I just love this show.
It's just so beautifully well done, well crafted all the time. And, and they touch, like I said, they touch on everything from corporate greed to, it's just the perfect mix of superheroes, satire, fascism, corporate capitalism, clout chasing, toxic masculinity, fandom. And it's just, again, I really can't overstate it. And the big bad guy, Homelander, who, I don't think this is giving anything away now, but the showrunners and the actors themselves have in fact confirmed that the big bad guy is modeled after ours truly, Donald Trump. And he's just this perfect culmination of insecurity, narcissism, and a massive amount of power, unchecked power, that he should have never been given to begin with.
Right. He's completely authoritarian, Homelander.
Right.
You know, and he's all star-spangled awesome in public.
Right.
But behind the scenes, he's the most awful thing you can possibly imagine. Things you can't even imagine he will do, and you will be shocked.
Absolutely. And it shows too how he, his horrible power and ambition is he doesn't care who he has to befriend, how awful those people might be, whatever views he has that he has to change in order to meet his ultimate end goals. For example, Homelander ends up dating a Nazi, an actual real life Nazi. And he didn't know that, to be fair, when he first started dating her. But then he starts to hear her say certain things and he's like, little weird. And then it comes out that she is a full-blown Nazi. And he's like, well, whatever. It's fine.
Yeah, it's going to help him. So he doesn't care. And that's, I think, related to Trump. Like, he doesn't give a shit about abortion or pro-life or anything like that. He was pro-choice most of his life. But in order to forward his goals, he needed the support of the pro-life people. So now all of a sudden, he's pro-life and Democrats have abortions during the 9th month when the baby's being born. Like he said in his speech that when they pull the baby out, they decide whether or not to let it live.
That was just the most obscene thing he'd ever said. He was
like on what planet are you living?
Right. Trump was like, oh yeah, in these states, they have a baby. It's a beautiful baby. And then together, the doctor and the mother decide if they will execute that baby after it's born. What is he saying?
I know. That's murder. Okay.
It's already illegal. Like,
right. Like, what are you talking about? Oh, but I'm just saying that to make the point that he doesn't give a shit about pro-life or the sanctity of life or any of that stuff. He just knew he needed that support.
On record saying that he wasn't even against abortion until it was politically advantageous for him to be against abortion.
Gross.
There's another really beautifully crafted scene, and it's like a long-standing theme, and they talk about it multiple times. But there's this character Blue Hawk who is going out into communities that are predominantly Black, but never policing white communities in the same way and wreaking a lot of havoc on the communities. And he's at this town hall kind of deal with constituents from that area. And he's, getting yelled at kind of. And then Blue Hawk is you can see him start to kind of lose it. And he's just saying, all lives matter, all lives matter, all lives matter. And then he really loses it. And he goes, soup lives matter. And really what that was supposed to be was white lives matter instead. And they're trying to use this guise of all lives matter, whatever. Because if you know anything at all, you know that Black lives matter doesn't mean that all lives don't matter. It means that people of color are being, persecuted at exorbitant rates in comparison to, their white counterparts. And that's what they're trying to call attention to with the slogan, Black Lives Matter. Not that other lives don't matter. Black Lives Matter encompasses also white lives that have been impacted by police violence and brutality.
Right.
So, okay. Yeah. So just to wrap that piece up, again, the show, incredible. It's about power hierarchies that are unaccountable. It definitely has a problem with far right ideology. It's afraid of fascism, of authoritarian takeover, but it definitely has its own critiques of the left as well, specifically about hollow corporate wokeness where they don't actually mean what they say. Sure, maybe they'll make their beer cans, with pride flags on them in June, but at the same time, they're donating to places and people and politicians and organizations that are anti everything LGBTQ people stand for. So, there's that piece of it too. But on the last note, Anthony Starr, he is the guy that plays Homelander. And that man is absolutely incredible, phenomenal. He needs
the acting is just
Oscar, whatever. Yeah, go ahead, Mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the acting is just 5-star. I think it's Emmy for TV show.
Emmy, okay, all the way around. Like it's the most incredible thing, and you love to hate him. And it's weird to say like, oh, he's such a great character because he's absolutely downright evil, vile, evil, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But there's a difference between thinking that the character is incredibly well done and relating to that character, which apparently Trump supporters just figured out that he's Trump halfway through season 2 or halfway through season 3,
through season 3. Yeah, like season 1, you get little hints here and there. Season 2, if you finish season 2 and don't totally know exactly what's going on, I don't know what to tell you. But apparently, these Trump fans absolutely love this show, loved to hate Homelander, get that he's the bad guy, but, also he's star-spangled awesome and, for America, so they like relate to that part of him, you know what I mean? But never really connected him with Trump, I don't think, until season 3. And then when it became absolutely no questions asked, definitely talking about Trump, his fans with the red hats, and I mean, it's just so on the nose. It's unmistakable. You can no longer miss it. It's not a matter of interpretation. Right. It absolutely is that. It wasn't until then that they were like, oh, you mean we're the bad guys? Wait a minute. You're talking about us? And so I just found that particularly hilarious.
As did I. It was incredible. I was like, how did you guys not know? Oh man. Okay. All right. So to close this segment out, again, watch the show. It's absolutely incredible. Be aware, it is a bit raunchy. Well, it's quite raunchy and it's quite violent, but seriously, give it a watch. They also have a spinoff, but it's a part of the exact same world, the boys' world. It's called Gen V. The season finale of that comes out tomorrow, Friday night. That series is shaping up to be incredible. And it kind of like is a continuation following different people of the boys, but like some of the same characters are still in it. And they're just really interactive too. Like if you follow VOT International on social media, you'll get like kind of like bonus content. They'll put updates out from the corporation, and it's just again, so well done.
Yeah, and I had no idea of that until you told me that yesterday or whenever that was, and I am absolutely loving it. That extra content is hilarious.
I'm cracking up. They have a guy, Coleman, who is basically Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, he's obviously Tucker Carlson.
And they give, updates. They had him come out with one after he got fired from Fox News, and he got fired from VOT Plus. And it's just, anyway, yeah, give it a watch. It's really good. Follow them on social media. Okay, so to finish this round off, we are going to do a rapid fire round of who said it, Trump or Homelander. We will guess, listeners. This is a surprise to my mom too.
That's hilarious because last time we did, was it Trump or Hitler, right? Or
yeah. Well, it was modern Republicans or Nazi Germany, and it was but then there was 5. It was Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist, Hitler, and then Lauren Boebert, Mike Johnson, and Donald Trump.
Yes. That was fun.
And you guys weren't all that great at it.
No, because it's scary how difficult it is. I'm sure this is going to be just as difficult.
Yeah, especially knowing that he's modeled after this guy, but still. Okay, so we'll do a rapid fire. You got to answer right off the top of your head as fast as you can, and we'll go over the answers at the end.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. I don't make mistakes. I'm not like the rest of you.
I'm going to say Homelander, but I know Trump said something similar.
Reporter says, but there are 19 dead and dozens wounded. What do you say to the Americans who are watching right now, feeling scared? And they respond, like I just said, this is not a problem. I don't have time for your ambush. Your job is to report facts, not attack us when we sit here and tell you the truth.
That could easily be Trump, but I think I remember that scene, so I'm going to say Homelander.
They snap their fingers and we jump. Why? Why do we do that?
Trump.
The American people, they know. They know when someone is telling them facts, and they know when the media is lying to them.
Homelander.
You see companies come and go, but talent is forever.
Trump.
So what? They're all starving, but one of them's got a cell phone?
Trump.
Flap, flap, flap goes that little mouth of yours.
Trump.
I'm stronger, I'm smarter, I'm better.
Trump.
I'm done. I'm done apologizing. I am done being persecuted for my strength.
Trump? That could be Trump. They could all be either of them, but go ahead.
You need me. You need me to save you. You do. I am the only one who possibly can.
Trump.
There is an opportunity here. People are scared. They don't trust Washington or the coastal elite, and they hate foreigners. What they want is a little John Wayne frontier justice, and that's what I do.
Homelander?
Together, we will make sure this never happens to our great nation again. God bless you, and God bless America.
I could so be either of them. So Trump.
All right. Those were all Homelander.
You dirty rat.
Yeah. But again, you couldn't tell.
It's interesting though how they make his dialogue be so Trumpy. I mean, it's obviously intentional, but like that part, I alone can fix it. That's what he said, but he just said it a different way. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you're right. But it's just sad in general is what I meant to say. Like this man, Homelander, is, I don't even know like where to begin with how absolutely evil he is. And the fact that you can create a world in a premise such as that with somebody as evil as him that still so represents Trump is the problem.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too how they show his little insecurities and vulnerabilities that he never shows to anybody else, but when he's by himself, you know what I mean? Like all he wants is he wants everybody to love him. When they show him by himself sometimes, that's when you really see the insecurity and the narcissism and all of that come out. And it really makes you wonder what Trump is thinking about all these legal cases and everything against him and his whole world collapsing when he's by himself. Because he's out in public like, this is a witch hunt. They're not going to get me. I'll fight for you. I'll go to jail if that's what it takes. Meanwhile, at night at home, he's crying.
Yeah, and that's the other thing with international social media. They're all over this witch hunt, witch hunt, witch hunt.
Right. Like they're just mimicking the words. And it's just brilliant because for me, if I were them, like when they finally got hit in the face with the fact that they were the bad people in that, the fans of Homelander are the bad people. Homelander is the bad people. You are them. He is Trump. This is you, But to see that portrayed in your face, knowing what that's portraying and seeing how awful it is, you would think they would look at that and go, oh my God, is that really what's happening? Wow, maybe I should re-examine what I'm doing with my life. Or maybe I should look into this further. Maybe I should think about not supporting Trump. Like, is that what it's like when you look at that and see it, But I don't know that it's having that effect. Hopefully it'll have that effect on some people, but the real Trumpers just like lost their minds on social media as soon as they figured it out, which was hilariously late.
I know. I really could not agree more. It's like, when they saw it, it reminds me of the conversation we had in our last episode about the flat earthers who sent up that machine that they spent all that money on. And then when it came back and told them the earth was round, and they were like kind of scared for a second. And then they were like, okay, I can't reconcile this. The equipment must be faulty.
Right. And oh man, I had so much hope for them too. I was like, you're so close. You're right there. And then no. No.
But again, the show, superhero satire, fascism, corporate capitalism, clout chasing, all that kind of stuff. Toxic masculinity, fandom, whatever. Check it out. Enjoy the show. Give us your comments about it. We would love to hear them.
Yeah, and allegory aside, it's outstanding anyway.
Correct.
Just in the story writing, like even if you didn't want to deal with any political allegory in the show,
right?
It's great anyway, just on its own.
Yeah, totally. I mean, now that we made sure that you know what it's about, it might be hard for you to take that lens off when you watch it. But nonetheless, if you are able to turn that off for yourself, the show, like my mom just said, is astounding, is incredible, is just worth the watch in general. All right, listeners, that does it for us this week. Stay tuned for Denise's return next week, where the three of us will dive into the latest developments in the ongoing New York civil fraud case and anything else that crops up over the next week. Thank you for tuning in, staying informed, and being a part of our podcast community. Follow us on social media, Spotify, and YouTube at The Real Deal _pod. Again, that's The Real Deal _pod. Let us know your thoughts and questions. We want to hear them. And before we wrap up, we'd like to encourage your active participation. We value your feedback, questions, and input, so don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're eager to hear your thoughts, address your questions, and keep this conversation going. Bye!